Brittany, and we have our panel here. I would like them to introduce themselves. We'll first start with the Reverend Joseph Wood. In full disclosure, Joe was my associate rector at my parish back in Baltimore, and someone I'm definitely proud to call a friend. So thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon, y'all, or good afternoon here, morning, where I think most of you are. It's great to be here. As Demetrius said, I'm the Reverend Joseph Wood. I'm the former associate rector at Emmanuel Church in Baltimore, and I just finished up my first year in the PhD program in philosophy and religion at the University of South Florida. Anything else that I should add to introduce myself?
That's perfect. Welcome, Joe. Lauren, good morning.
Good morning. As they mentioned, my name is Lauren Sleeper. I am probably a newer kind of member here at St. Bart's Church, and just started getting involved with the Regeneration Praise team. And that's something I've done quite a bit of through my life so far, is helping to get praise bands going at various churches. And it's been quite the journey, going to Catholic churches, non-denominational, and finally finding the Episcopal Church. And it's been an absolute blessing to be a part of this particular church and the Episcopal Church at large, and to now introduce my foster children to this church and start a family here. So I'm excited to see what the future brings.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us this morning, Lauren. Ashley, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you guys so much for having me. My name is Ashley Hope, and I have been on and off involved in ministry and missions for the last 5 years in different countries, actually, all over the world. And I'm just really excited to be here. And I can't wait to get this discussion started.
Great. Great. Well, before we begin, thank you for joining us, Ashley. We do have a poll that we would like those watching at home to participate in. Just as a housekeeping matter, I've seen this question come up a few times. You will only be able to see us, the panelists. We cannot see you or hear you. You will only be able to see the 5 boxes that you see on your screen now. So hopefully that is okay. But we'll jump into our poll. And the question is, do you think the Episcopal Church is doing enough to welcome members of the LGBTQ plus community? So go ahead and feel free to answer that question. Yes, no, or I do not know enough about the Episcopal Church. Okay, that is perhaps one of the closest polls that I have seen. So clearly, you know, as the church, we have some work to do. And with our panelists here today, you guys obviously have had different roles in churches and other religious organizations. I would be interested from your perspective if you think the Episcopal Church is doing enough. Joe?
I will admit I was one of the people that said, no, I don't think the Episcopal Church is doing enough. And I say that not in a chastising way, but I think that a lot of it is aspirational, that I don't think the answer should be yes. I think we should be continually asking ourselves, for any community that we want to welcome into the church, what are we doing? How can we do better? And I think the Episcopal Church has had a lot of great strides, marriage equality, the full participation of LGBTQAI plus people in ministry. But I think there are more questions. What is our relationship to gender, especially in terms of the divine, but also in terms of how we address members of our community? Like, it's a very small example, but brothers and sisters, reinforces certain expectations about gender that I don't think are always welcoming to every member of the LGBTQAI+ community.
Thank you, Joe. Lauren or Ashley, your thoughts?
I could say from the beginning, even just getting the Episcopal Church out there, because I had never even heard of Episcopal Church until like the end of my college years, later 20s. So just getting the Episcopal Church's name out there for one. I can definitely say, as Joe mentioned, like we can always be doing more. I can tell you the reason I found out about the church was because of San Diego Gay Pride Parade several years ago. And it was I always forget the name, St. Paul's, that's right downtown by the Balboa Park. They had a huge presence in that parade. And so my wife, then girlfriend, attended that. And I think the more of those kinds of things that the church can do, whether it's advertisements at various LGBTQA centers, because maybe that's something that we could do, just getting the name out there. The other thing I think is really important, every time I've been on my church journey of searching for churches, I go onto Google Maps and I go on to the various websites and I click and I try to search. And so if the Episcopal Church isn't one of the first things that pops up when you type in gay friendly church, then that means we still have a lot of work to do. And I think our particular church is great about saying all are welcome, no exceptions. But I think not every single Episcopal church is very clear on their websites about how welcoming are we. And that's clear that they state, like, yes, we have women and men as church leaders. Yes, we have gay and various levels of LGBTQ people involved in our leadership roles. And that needs to be stated clearly on websites, in any kind of documentation that we can find. So those are some things I know for me personally, as someone who likes to research my churches in advance, that needs to be out there so that people aren't having to email pastors and say, hey, is this church going to work for my family? So those are some things that kind of stand out to me.
Awesome. Ashley?
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that church clarity is so crucial. And I would also echo that there is really never a point to where we reach enough or where we arrive. I think when I've been thinking about this question a lot, I've had some exposure with the Episcopal Church. I was just in a pre-seminary program, and we talked a lot about inclusion. And I think it's almost as if inclusion is too small a word. What we're really trying to get at is belonging, and not just for one particular community, but for all communities. I think it's interesting that this community has, obviously we've fought so hard for inclusion and for that ability to be both gay and proud, gay and Christian. But I also think there are different communities, whether that's race, whether that's, that have never been officially accepted or included or welcomed into the church and still face a lot of the same things that we may face along the way. So I think it opens up a much bigger conversation into, are we after inclusion and is that enough? Or are we truly after the belonging that says we are all we all have this inherent dignity, and then go from there, and we are all welcome and we are all existing together in this body trying to figure it out.
Thanks, Ashley.
That was all really good. And great to just note all of that as church leaders, to continue to make that happen and to learn from you guys. So it's beautiful. With all that being said, our next question is, how did you share your coming out experience with your family and your friends, like how did they receive that? How did the church receive it? How did your family receive it? Especially for those that maybe here listening that haven't come out yet. Ashley, would you like to start? Absolutely.
So I think I'll preface it by saying this. I dream of a world where coming out is not a thing. You never finish coming out. That's also a funny thing, because I meet new people every day. I get new jobs. I'm introduced to new communities, and it's always this process. So I'd love I'd love a world where we don't assume gender identity and we don't assume sexual orientation. And just everybody has this beautiful process of discovering that. For me personally, coming out was kind of twofold. So my family received it very well and were incredibly loving and incredibly they just looked at me and kind of were like, you know, they asked the good questions of like, are you happy? Is this what you want in life? And we're very receptive to everything that I kind of explained to them and led them through. When I met my now wife, I was working for a ministry in Spain, and that was a bit of a different story. I did end up losing my job there because I chose to pursue a relationship with my wife, like I said. And that was really difficult because I think a lot of the leadership were wrestling through the topic for the very first time. And it's a very dangerous space. It's not a safe space to also be wrestling myself with this sexual orientation that I'm not sure if God is okay with, that I'm not sure, you know, I'm researching everything possible. I got to the point where I could argue both sides perfectly. And then I kind of had to throw my arms up and just think about the fact that my wife says this, and I think it brings it back to the core of the questions we're asking. She said, I don't think if there is one day where we appear before God, I don't think that God's going to say, I'm sorry, you loved too much. And I think that kind of describes really now how I live my life towards any and all communities, any and all people that may be on the fringes. Because I got to experience that a little bit by again, being fired from my job, but it's opened my eyes to a world that I didn't necessarily see before and people I didn't see before. And so it's been this beautiful process, and even the struggle and even the heartache, I think I realized that too was a deep, deep gift.
Thank you for that. Lauren, would you like to share?
Sure. My situation was a little bit twofold as well. I initially came out to just, I'd say, my best friend and a couple of very close relatives, and it didn't go very well initially. I was told it was just a phase, that you're copping out by not trying harder with men. And so I actually went back into the closet for about 8 or 9 years. And I delved even more into my Christianity. I tried to essentially pray the gay away. I got more involved in churches and was teaching youth groups and children's choirs and all kinds of stuff, to the point where I was literally working at a Catholic church, working at a Catholic school, doing 5-6 masses a weekend and just immersing myself. But for me, I was doing all of that and then going home and watching the L Word. So I knew that there was still this, you know, inner struggle going on. And it even got to the point where I was in Rome and I went and prayed at St. Peter's Basilica and went to confession there and confessed my sins. And I was told, go say some Hail Marys and some Our Fathers and whatnot. And I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. But at that moment, for me, I was struggling with this so much about battling my religion and my relationship with God versus these internal feelings that I was having for both men and women. And I literally thought, wow, you know, I've been to confession. It'd just be easier if I could just die now and go to heaven. Not that I was ever suicidal, not that I ever didn't want to live, but it was that if I keep pursuing my life the way that I feel, then I'm sinning. And that's the kind of terminology that, you know, was coming to me from my close friends and family. So it was literally 8 or 9 years of just staying in the closet until I eventually met my now wife. And, you know, I think for some of us, when you meet the right person, it gives you this bravery that you never had before, because you're like, I want to be with this person. I don't care what anybody thinks. This is meant to be. And the fact that God kept showing me signs that I was meant to be with this woman, and I could talk to you all for hours about that. But when I came out again, I lost a lot of friends. I lost my church community, and part of that was moving, but I lost a lot of those people. My best friend literally said, you need to choose me and Jesus, because I can't walk down with you through this path. And she couldn't recognize the fact that, yes, you can be gay and Christian at the same time. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And that for also ourselves. And so it's a constant struggle. It's a constant battle and growth and trying to figure out yourself and where you are in this world. But I know for me personally, when I found the right person, that I was like, no, like, this is it. This is meant to be. You know, everything else goes by the wayside. And the more that my family got to meet her and got to know her, I think they like her even more than they like me. So that worked out. And, you know, I was very blessed that the relatives that I was the most worried about, who had said different things 8-9 years prior, they were all at my wedding. And that was an absolute blessing. And I'm still very grateful to them for that. So, yeah, it's been quite the whirlwind, but the biggest thing I can say to everybody out there who's afraid, you have to find the right time for you. Because let's say you're a high schooler and you're living with your parents and you know your parents are crazy conservative, you might not want to come out yet. And I know that sucks, but you have to protect yourself. And so you have to do what works for you. Wait until college, wait until you're on your own, wait until you're in a position to financially support yourself. If that's what's right for you, because I can tell you, it can be a very scary thing. But if you are blessed to have very open, progressive parents, family, school, church community, whatever, then that's awesome. And I'm so excited for you that you can live your true self as young as possible. So that's it.
I love the love stories. Joe, would you like to share with us as well?
So I also grew up Roman Catholic, and I actually came out as wanting to be a priest to my parents before anything else. And I think they were a little shocked by that, but they handled it pretty well. And then they handled it pretty well again a few years later when I came out yet again. But the interesting thing was that it was also the challenge then, because I was Roman Catholic. I knew what the church was saying about LGBT people and was especially beginning to say about LGBT priests. So I was like, all right, I have this part of my identity, clearly God-given, and I have this part of my identity, clearly God-given, but how do I bring them into a unified life? And when I went off to college, that became a big part of the question for me. And I became heavily involved in the local church. I was actually in process with the Dominican Order in DC, while also becoming the president of the LGBTQ student organization at my college. And my friends were kind of like, how is this going to work? And actually one of them anonymously sent an email on my behalf, not ratting me out, to the director of vocations, being like, so my friend really loves your order. Like, he went to the vocation weekend and really feels called, but he's also gay. Like, how is that going to work? And I will never forget the wording of, the director said something really lovely back, being like, oh, we celebrate like all calls from God, da, 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 da. But if your friend has a deep-seated tendency towards homosexuality, well, then you can't accept them. And so I was like, oh, okay, all right. And there was a few months when I was like, all right, well, called by God, I need to like put this part of my life aside and become a good little Dominican. But then I realized, like, you shouldn't devote your life to God when it's based around a lie. So I left the Roman Catholic Church. Fortunately, there happened to be an Episcopal church literally in the center of town, and it felt like home. All the ritual felt familiar, but I could be myself. But I think Ashley and Lauren have both pointed out that it's not only the external celebration of who you are, but there's often a lot of internal stuff you have to work through. So even as I could be myself from growing up, from what had happened with the Roman Church, I was very hesitant to share myself, to share who I might be dating or to talk. So that was also a process. I remember the first time I talked in a sermon about being gay, I was a nervous wreck. So it's not only the question of how do you create a space to welcome and rejoice in members of the LGBTQAI plus community, but also how do you give them space to work through any baggage they're bringing with them, because the church as a whole has a very mixed track record. So how do you let that be okay too? Not only it's wonderful who you are a child of God, but also it's okay to feel the pain and frustration that you may be bringing with you because of what has happened.
Thank you all for sharing that, those very personal stories, and thank you again. For Joe, Lauren, and Ashley, obviously, for those listening today, as Christians, we are called to action, and the church has struggled with how we engage members of the LGBTQ community. So what can we do? What would be your advice to us in how we can continue to be more welcoming, more affirming?
I could say one thing is that churches need to not be afraid to put out there that you are welcoming. Because I know some churches, literally, I've talked to pastors where they're like, well, we're welcoming, but we don't want you to let everybody in town know that we're the big gay church. We don't want to lose our parishioners that are already here. And I think that's something that the head leaders of that church need to be willing to take that risk, that you might lose some parishioners, you might lose some of your very high donating parishioners. And that's a risk that you have to be willing to take in order to be as inclusive as possible. And that's scary, but realize that by making and taking that risk, you're opening up so many more people that could be coming to your church. And I think that's one thing that, people kind of missed on the whole marriage equality thing. It's like, let gay people get married, because there's all those people who are going to be throwing money your way for all of the different things that are involved in throwing a wedding. There's a lot of opportunities there for businesses. So that's something to think about. So churches need to not be afraid to step out and to say, yes, we are welcoming. And if you lose a few parishioners, you know what, then they're not necessarily following, and I can't say the right path, but they're not following the godly Jesus way of gathering together as a church. Because of anything, we have to look back and Jesus welcomed everyone, and that's the thing that we all should be doing.
Thanks, Lauren. Joe or Ashley?
So I would agree, and actually echo something that Lauren said earlier, that if they don't know what the Episcopal Church is, they're not going to know what our relationship with the LGBTQAI plus community is. So it's not only being ready to welcome people, but it's also just putting yourself out there in general, whether at Pride or otherwise. Make sure they know that there is an Episcopal Church, let alone, and then start being like, and also, and be very mindful of the language, because a lot of people will be like, oh, well, we say that all are welcome. And in my experience, what all are welcome usually means is all are welcome as long as they come in and then nothing changes about the community. They become exactly like who we are. And I think we need to think about, there's the term radical welcome, the idea that you can welcome people in such a way that you are ready as a community to change in new and unexpected ways. And it will be scary because your community is expanding, because there are new people bringing very different things. And again, being able to rejoice in that, even if it's a scary space, how you will grow and the unexpected ways you will grow.
Thank you, Joe. Ashley?
I think I've actually gotten this question a few times, and I was talking to my wife about it yesterday, actually. And she made a very valid point. She's like, first and foremost, you can't speak for everyone, especially everyone of an entire community. And secondly, think of a moment where you were most unwelcome. What did you want? What did you need? You know what I mean? We make these things, we kind of perpetuate this idea that it's an issue or that it's a problem or that this community needs XYZ. But again, if you go back to that belonging and that humanity that we all have, like, what did you need? What did you need in that moment to feel welcome and radically welcomed? I love that. I love that with all of my being, because it is an all out, over the top, absolutely no regard for oneself kind of welcome that we are really, truly talking about. And for all. I can't stress that word enough. Because yes, while I am a member of that community, I'm also a member of the human race. And we have work to do in so many areas. But it's about taking it back to yourself and really, truly sitting with that moment. Because we've all been there. We've all felt unwelcome. We've all felt kind of outcast or shunned for whatever we've done. And that's the beauty of Jesus. No matter what space you find yourself in, it's a radical welcome for all.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank our panelists for joining us this morning. We want to give you, our listening audience, the opportunity to ask some questions of Joe, Lauren, and Ashley. So feel free to go ahead and type those into the question box in Zoom. And while you're thinking of those, we did receive a question via email last evening that I'd like to ask our panelists. This is from someone who is a grandmother of a transgender toddler, and she wants to know how she can help her granddaughter, as well as her parents, help this young person adjust to a new school, to a new community. As a grandmother, she worries about acceptance and safety as definitely one of her primary concerns. Ashley, let's start with you.
I think the immediate thing that comes to mind for me in that situation is doing the work of wrestling down your own fear. Because any child needs safety and comfort and a listening ear. And it's really hard to do that when you're afraid, even with good intentions for that child. A lot of what you bring to that table is kind of the internal work that needs to be done to address that in yourself. And then you can move forward in just walking alongside them and hearing them out. And it's tough. The world is tough for all kids. You know what I mean? And it's this really hard thing because we can't actually protect them. They are hardwired for struggle. I believe Brene Brown says that. And our job is to make them know that they are worthy of love and belonging. That might be the singular job, because the rest is up to life and stuff happens. But I think the way we do that best is wrestling down kind of the emotions and the fear and all of the complex feelings we have around the subject ourselves. And then we can enter into that space just a lot more loving and a lot more open and a lot more free to kind of really be there for that child.
Great. Joe, as a priest, would definitely be interested in your perspective.
I mean, I think Ashley covered a lot of it, that no matter how good your intentions are, and yes, it will be more difficult for the granddaughter, probably, but like there's no LGBTQIA plus person that doesn't know that. Even this kid, I'm sure, knows that there will be challenges. And if you are too anxious, they'll read that too, that they will internalize that as well. So no matter what the world may do, and I'm not saying be naive about any of that, make sure that there is this place of safety, of celebration for the granddaughter, so that she has the tools, the happiness, the confidence, all of it to tackle whatever she faces. Really, what's the saying? Out of the mouth of babes. Follow her lead. She knows who she is. She knows what she needs. Listen and work with her to give her all that she needs. The home, the love, the celebration that, I mean, all of us need. So.
Thank you, Joe. Lauren, we have one question that came in. I'd like to start with you. What advice would you give your parents about ways that they can support the community?
Ways they can support the community?
Yeah.
I mean, are they asking like for our own parents or us as parents? What do they mean by that?
So the question is, what advice?
Like the parents of LGBTQA kids, and how can they support the community? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I would definitely say, for starters, to be open to communicating about your own child, right? So don't shy away from things. Because just parents in general saying, oh yeah, my son's gay or my daughter, blah, 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 just them speaking out and letting people know, oh yeah, I know someone who's gay, you know, that kind of thing. I think making that so that people are more aware, because I think in general, and you can make this with anything, people don't like what they don't understand. And people are afraid of things that they can't come to grasp with, that because they haven't witnessed it. And I mean, you can compare that with so many things, you know, like this epidemic right now. People think, oh, well, it doesn't exist because I don't know anybody who's had it, right? So with this, I think it's really important that parents speak out and are proud about their kids and support them from the beginning. Then I think the next step is for them to see about getting involved in things like PFLAG and whatnot. And then I would say for me personally, I think it's really important that parents, if they are churchgoers, if they are Christians, attend churches that are also gay friendly. Because I can say for me, all of my relatives still attend Catholic church that still regularly talks about sin and whatnot. And they want me to go with them to those churches. And they think, you know, that I'm being ridiculous by not going with them. And they still really can't come to grasp with how harmful that is for any of us to attend churches that aren't welcome and accepting of us. So I think for them to take that big leap and consider leaving their own church community so that they can be a part of a community that accepts their own child, whether their child still lives with them or not. Now that's tricky, and that's not for everyone, especially for people who have been involved in their church communities for decades and generation after generation. But that's something that I think people need to consider, so that their child knows that they truly are accepted, that it's not just halfway, you know?
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. Ashley or Joe, care to share some thoughts on that?
I'll jump in quickly just because this question is actually from my mom. So thanks for being here, Mom, and asking questions like that. Great first step. So I think that is a large part of it, that representation is important. So especially if your kids are younger, make sure that you have age-appropriate media showing LGBTQ people, help them to see themselves in the world. And then also for yourself, whatever age your kids are, educate yourself. Read books, read blogs, read whatever form of media you find easiest to consume. There will be stuff telling you what it's like to be an LGBT person, what it's like to be a parent of an LGBT child. So search out some of that information for yourself as well. Come to panels like this. And I would recommend, I talked a little bit about Radical Welcome. Stephanie Spellers, who works for the National Church, has written a lot about that. So any material she has would be great. There are other books. Queer Christianities is one. There's Patrick Chang's Rainbow Christianity, I think he called it. And I Will Bless You and You Will Be a Blessing are the marriage liturgies that were put out. And those have discussions, all the things that they explored in the study and the research of how to put those rites together. So getting copies of those, not only to look at the rite, but all the discussions they have around it would be some great ways to begin to think.
Great, thanks, Joe. Our next question is someone who's gay. They are a member of their church choir and a lay Eucharistic minister. And they feel like the LGBTQ is invisible in their church in some ways. How could we as a church community give the LGBTQ community a safe place to be more visible?
I could say for one, it definitely starts with language. I think when it comes to any of the prayers in church, when it comes to things that are spoken to the whole congregation, it's really important that inclusive language is used. And as Joseph mentioned earlier, that we try to get away from the brothers and sisters and saying like, oh, where's your mommy and daddy and things like that. I think that we need to get to more inclusive language. You all, you know, things like that, that are not gender specific. And and again, putting it out there, you know, on websites or when they're welcoming everyone. And it is definitely tricky. And I'm sure that Joseph and Ashley are better at speaking more eloquently than myself in regards to that language, but it very much starts with language.
Ashley.
Yeah, I think language, and also I think talking about it, having conversations, having, like Lauren just said, having it be something that you're talking about congregation wide, like, and it's not just something, again, I think it was Lauren that said it before, that it's just kind of like, we're affirming, you know, like that secrecy is a really, the invisible, the secret is a really heavy thing in, I would argue to say, the lives of many, if not all, LGBTQ people. It has flown throughout our stories. And it's a really hurtful and a really damaging thing, because when it is secret, it is bad. Like, there's almost an equal sign there. And so I think, again, inclusive language, again, just being vocal about it, having conversations, creating spaces that are about conversations, but also like keeping it to a space that, again, respects that dignity of every person. Because I've seen a lot of conversations done well, and I've seen some that are pretty harmful too. So it's a tricky balance. And I don't envy any leadership's position on this, but it just needs to continue to kind of be pushed. All of these things need to be pushed to the forefront of, are we dialoguing about it? Because we are afraid of what we don't know. That's been said, and it will be said again, because we fear that. And so continually kind of exposing people to all of these things, and giving people in your church that identify this way a voice to also speak to them is huge. So this panel is huge.
Thanks, Ashley. We have a question come in. How can the leaders of a particular church help members who are not welcoming of LGBTQ plus parishioners to understand why they may want to become more accepting? Joe, your thoughts?
Fair. That I think it's a lot of the same questions, that visibility, talking about it, that not only during Pride, but like National Coming Out Day or Transgender Day of Remembrance or World AIDS Day, just some mention of it, some awareness that even if you don't know anyone who's trans in the congregation, naming that they could be in the community, that they're worthy of prayer and celebration. And you may get some pushback. You will almost definitely get some pushback, but then that's a great opportunity for dialogue, because people will be like, well, we don't have any trans people. Why celebrate Trans Day of Remembrance? But the question is not who necessarily is in the congregation, but who could be in the congregation. Who do you want in the congregation? And then also, I know as a preacher that it can be very tempting to avoid, they're sometimes called clobber passages, but those passages that have been used as anti-gay. And there are also passages that have been used as pro-gay passages, like the story of Ruth. And don't, as a preacher, be too wary of those. Now, don't assume a voice that isn't yours, but be willing to talk about it, be willing to wrestle with it in front of the congregation. Let them know that this is an ongoing conversation and that it's an important conversation.
Thank you, Joe. And Joe, I don't know if you know this one, but I certainly don't. I'd hope the answer is 100%, but it's definitely worth discussing. What percentage of Episcopal churches in North America are truly accepting of all people?
Am I allowed to say none of them? Just because I think it is a similar thing, that it's not like you hit a certain point and like you've accepted all of the people, you're good, Jesus will come back any moment now, that it's a continual process of who have we forgotten, who could we celebrate more, that there is always some way to be more, make sure that everyone belongs.
Okay, thank you. Ashley or Lauren, any thoughts?
Yeah, I actually wanted to share one of the reasons that brought us to St. Bart's was that years ago, they were doing this thing where they had different parishioners come up and just share their story. And during Pride Month, they had different LGBTQAI, etc. People go up there and tell their coming out story and share why they go to St. Bart's and why they like this church. And I think for the people who are out and proud and Christian and feel okay and confident enough about speaking to a whole congregation like that, you know, I think we need to open up opportunities for that, like this Zoom. But of course, whenever things eventually get back into person, having that space during a regular church service, because all the butts are in the seats, they're going to have to listen to it, you know? So take advantage of the fact that you've got everybody there and be like, okay, guys, well, we're going to talk about this today. And if people want to walk out, they can walk out. I know I, for one, have walked out of church services before when I've been offended. And if people don't like it, they can leave. But I think by just kind of giving those little moments, getting it out there, getting them more exposed to that, is going to help them to have more of an understanding, have more of a perspective, be able to be more empathetic to the things going on with some of us. So yeah, take advantage of when people are all there together.
Thanks, Lauren. And we have one more question and then want to wrap up. How can a church include LGBTQ through religious art and symbols? Not just a rainbow, but that speaks to the God acceptance of their spiritual acceptance and participation in ministry. Gay saints is how it ends. It's an interesting question. Joe, any thoughts on that?
That I do actually, I mean, there are gay saints or saints that have been celebrated as particularly appropriate to the gay community. Joan of Arc, Saint Sebastian, or more recent figures like Matthew Shepard. He was Episcopalian. So the example of who are you celebrating in terms of the history of the church. And also one of the things we've sort of touched on, I don't think we've named yet, on your church website or on bulletin boards, who is in the pictures? Like, that's one of the things I look at, not only what language do they use, but who is being identified as this is what we want our community to look like. So not that you need to change the St. Gus entirely, but just make sure that at the gay wedding, at a panel like this, if it's in person, ideally, take pictures, make sure they're up, make sure people can see them on your website, on the walls. There are all kinds of gay saints around you. Make sure they are visible.
Thank you, Joe. And like to thank each of you for Joe, Lauren, and Ashley. Thank you so much for joining us today. We invite you to join us for 11 a.m. worship here at St. Bart's, where all are welcome, no exceptions, and that you can see that on Facebook or on YouTube. One of the things that we mentioned earlier about the celebration of Pride here in the San Diego area is St. Bart's will be taking a collection, if you will, if you are so inclined to donate to our Pride 2020 efforts on the St. Bart's website. All of those resources will be distributed to organizations throughout San Diego County that help LGBTQ youth. So you can click on, it's at stbartschurch.org, click giving, and you will click Pride 2020, and those resources will be distributed to those organizations. Thank you all for joining us today again, and always remember, love wins all the time. Have a great day.